Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast, sponsored by Lone Oak Coffee. Visit loneoakcoffee.com, use promo code COFFEE2020 for a discount. Today, I'm joined by Newsday columnist Bob Glauber, who has covered the NFC East since 1985 and wrote a book 2 years ago in which he featured Joe Gibbs. He shares some excellent insight into Gibbs, plus on the Giants and even the Jets. Might Sam Darnold be available this offseason? And then I'm joined by Tyler Roman for some fantasy football talk. Who are some good plays based not only on recent showings, but on injury situations around the league? Tyler's a former NFL scout and he shares his insight. Don't forget, you can read my work on ESPN.com. Follow Bob on Twitter at Bob Glauber, Glauber, and read him at Newsday.com. And you can follow Tyler at NFL Scout 21. And now, here's my conversation with Bob Glauber. Joined by Bob Glauber, and Bob, he's been one of my favorite writers for a long time before I got into business. So that's why it's always been a pleasure to deal with you. You've covered the NFC East for a long time. You have great perspective on it, written books on it. But let's start with the current day Giants coming off another crushing loss. Where are you at with your assessment of Daniel Jones and then also Joe Judge?
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there, John, because
yes, there is. I know.
Man, Daniel Jones, just when you're ready to say, every week it's the same thing. He throws these killer interceptions. He'll fumble the ball. And you're saying, he just doesn't have, this is not, you need more than this. And then he'll do what he did last night. Throw the potential tying touchdown pass in the last 28 seconds on a 77-yard drive and converts 2 fourth down attempts. So, I think Daniel Jones is not going to be an elite quarterback. It's weird in today's day and age, quarterbacks have to develop much faster. It's just the reality of it. And they're put in there earlier when they can play well on their rookie contracts. It's so much better for a franchise. So they're trying to force feed Daniel Jones, and there are some encouraging results, but obviously, they're 1-7, and Daniel Jones continues to throw bad picks and fumble the ball. So he's incomplete right now. Judge, I'm encouraged by Judge. I think he's a solid, really good leader. I think the players really like him. He's tough, but he will defend his players, and he's very good with clock management. That's totally overlooked, on a 1-7 team. But, when this team gets good and he, they got to get better players. But if this team gets good, that will help them a lot because you see so many coaches struggle with time management stuff. He does not. And that's encouraging. So I think Joe Judge does have it as a coach.
It's funny in watching them. Outside of one game, it feels like they're in every game. So why is that? Their defense to me has been better than I anticipated. Why are they in every game? But yet, and obviously they can't close, but they're in every game.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a testament to coaching. I think, this team is marginally talented, right? They still need a lot of help in a lot of areas. So when you have decent coaching, you can hang around these games against really good teams. Tampa was almost as hot a team as there was coming into the game last night. And the Giants, went toe-to-toe for 60 minutes. And, they should have won that game. Had Daniel Jones not thrown 2 picks, I think they would have won that game. So I think it does speak to coaching. It speaks to a collective mindset on the team that they are together. They're not kind of fracturing despite the record. And really that you talk about that only game that they did not play well in was against 49ers backups, for God's sake. So, there are some encouraging signs, and Joe Judge is choosing the line of, well, I'm choosing to say we're getting better. We're going to hold on to that and maybe things turn around. Washington had the team in 81 with Joe Gibbs that first year when they went 0-5. He was going to be the first coach fired without ever winning a game, and they turned it around. I'm not going to liken this team to that, but that's the ultimate example of just hanging in, trying to believe, and trying to move forward from there.
And then looking at the New York quarterback situation, because it's Sam Darnold with the Jets, and then and then obviously Jones with the Giants. Do you think that both will have new quarterbacks? Is it too early to say that both might have new quarterbacks next year? And if so, what do you think happens there? Because there could be a trickle-down effect where some guys are available that might be attractive to other teams.
Yeah. John, I think that the Jets will have a new quarterback. I think that just all signs are leading to that. If they go 0-16 or 1-15, get the first pick, they will go for a Trevor Lawrence or a Justin Fields from Ohio State. And I think they will change the quarterback because they're going to get a new coach. You want to start over with a fresh set of expectations and players. And I think they go in that direction. The Giants, I'm not so sure right now. I think it's up in the air. And these last 8 games are very important for Daniel Jones and for the Giants to evaluate him. And, John, one other factor in there is that the person who evaluated Daniel Jones and made him the 6th overall pick might not be there next year. So Dave Gettleman is very much up in the air as general manager. And if he's gone, there's obviously no allegiance to Daniel Jones in terms of Judge inherited him and whatever new general manager comes in will have inherited him. So I think the thinking will be open, but the way the Giants operate, they're going to give Daniel Jones every chance to succeed over the long term. They saw it with Eli Manning. It really took him till his 4th year to kind of get it all together. He showed a lot of signs, but that 4th year he won the Super Bowl. Even that year, there were a lot of doubts about Eli Manning until he caught fire in the playoffs and then went on a roll and became a potential Hall of Famer.
And with Darnold, is he a guy, what is your assessment of him? Because again, I'm looking at Washington's situation. They're going to have some choices of maybe the draft or young veterans or someone like that. Is he a guy that you still think can play? Do you have confidence in him, or what's your opinion there?
I like Sam Darnold as a quarterback. And I say, John, that if you put Sam Darnold with this year's Buffalo Bills, they would be, with the record they have, in first place in the AFC East as a rising team. And if you put Josh Allen with the Jets, he would be a mess. People would say he doesn't have it. It's time to make a change. So obviously that's what's around them. What's around Sam Darnold and what's around Josh Allen is normal. That's how you build a franchise. And they've given him the tools. Sam Darnold doesn't have that. So throw it all together, I do think that he will be on the move. And he would be somebody for, if Washington is looking for a quarterback who can kind of settle things down, but things are around him that are better, then he would certainly be a viable option.
I think the hard part is to go from the Jets to Washington and feel like that's the hard thing. But they may also be able to better build something here because they have a couple young building blocks and all that. Let's turn to the NFC East because it's been you've been covering this division since the mid 80s?
Yeah, 85 was my first year. Yep.
Okay. So what's it been like for you and so you go from covering that to being around this. What's that been like? John, it's shocking to see it.
John, we're getting paid to cover a game. Come on. That's true. I never lose. I truly never lose sight of that. My brother, who's a journalist out in Milwaukee, covers politics, so he does real life stuff. He says, "Bob, how do you watch this terrible football?" But I'm like, "Yeah, I'm watching a game, and it's interesting in its own way." But I'm grateful that I did come in then because that was such a special time in the NFC East. The NFC East was the epicenter of great football in the NFL from, really 81 or 82 when Washington won it first, until the 90s. And then Coughlin comes in, wins 2 Super Bowls. So there have been a number of great seasons to watch and rivalries. And now it's just really a down cycle that, nobody enjoys it, but it is what it is. And you get through it. Hopefully teams make better decisions and they can turn things around.
And I agree with you. Like, I never lose sight of the fact that I cover football for a living, and I'm talking about football for a living. Bad football is still better than good other things in a lot of cases, right? So I am cognizant of that. But if you're going to cover football, you'd like to see good football. And I do, and you can take the cycles, but I'm curious from your perspective, why do you think it's gotten to this point?
Well, I think it's decision making and franchise building and the bad job of franchise building that the teams have done. And each situation is its own world. Washington's had longstanding problems it's just an intractable situation year after year after year after year. And, hopefully Ron Rivera can kind of pull them out of this muck. The Giants, they hung on to Eli Manning probably a year too long. Then you look at the Daniel Jones acquisition. Was that the smart thing to do? There are these flashpoints of decisions that when wrong decisions are made, you pay for it, and you pay for it over a number of years. Now, Dave Gettleman, if this does not work out, they had tremendous stability at the general manager position from 1979 with George Young all the way through the end of the Jerry Reese era. And you can say Gettleman is a part of that because he worked for Coughlin. Just incredible stability at general manager, and you can't underestimate that. But Jerry Reese in his later years, he did not draft well and had to buy free agents to just get competitive. And then Dave Gettleman, it's the jury's still out. If Daniel Jones turns out to be a really good player, a lot of the heat will be off. But if he's not, then this team is set back, a number of years. Now, Philly is in a down cycle, but they won a Super Bowl. And Dallas, to me, the descent of the Dallas Cowboys began in 1995 when Jerry Jones parted company with Jimmy Johnson. His ego got in the way. And that team has not won. They've won one Super Bowl with Jimmy's team coached by Barry Switzer, and that's it. So, there are really franchise-altering decisions that are made that last for years. And in the case of Dallas, it's still lasting. Look, they could have been they could have been the Patriots of their era, but Jerry didn't like Jimmy getting all the credit and moved on. And that's 25 years ago, for God's sake.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think of Ron Rivera? Are you a fan of his, or what do you think?
Yes, I am a fan of Rivera. Good man, good football coach. I love the aggressiveness. We're watching the game, John, and the Giants game, and okay, it's an early game, fine, but it's going to potentially get into overtime if you're coaching traditionally. I turned to Tom Rock. I go, oh, I think this is going to be a quick game here. Tom goes, why are you jinxing it? Tom goes, why are you jinxing it? I go, I'll tell you why I'm not jinxing it, because Ron Rivera, if they score a touchdown, they're going for two. One way or another, this game's over. Either Washington wins or they lose. Boom. So I like that aggressiveness, and I think players gravitate toward that, and today's players gravitate toward that. The key now is, finding the quarterback, settling things down, and just building normally, right? Normal is something just we have not associated with Washington for decades now.
For decades.
So, right. How do you do it, John?
I just remind myself I'm covering football.
I know. So, it sometimes
that's
goes.
All,
yeah.
It does. And, but it is like at the end of the day, I'm talking to people about football. And the only part that gets frustrating for me is when you get to like mid-November and the games just don't matter. So if they're 5-8 and the games matter, okay, we can talk about the games. And that may be the case this year. Last thing I want to ask you about, because you wrote the book Guts and Genius that came out, 2 years ago, correct? It was Bill Walsh.
Yep.
Bill Parcells and Joe Gibbs, and just the highlight of the 80s and all that. What did you learn about Gibbs in the reporting of that book?
He's a pretty open story. So people know about him. I found him to be disarmingly, he's a very humble guy, which is nothing new. I guess the parts about the workaholic part of it was really more deep-seated than I think he let on. His insecurity, I found the insecurity of all those coaches, especially in the beginning, was fascinating. They all thought they were going to be fired very early in their careers, and they came at it. And I think the one thing I gained a more of an appreciation about with Gibbs was, his ability to change the course of games with his mind and to change the course of franchises with his mind was incredible. And I think that he was one of the greatest coaches of all time for that reason, because you look at all, and I'm talking about maybe the greatest ever, because you look at all the coaches, legendary, Shula, Landry, Knoll, Walsh, they all, and Lombardi, they all had great quarterbacks, and Gibbs did not have the luxury of that. So that really separated him. He was really fun to kind of deal with, and I love the stories about the players around him. Especially the Hogs. They have that shack where they went to drink beer after practice, and Gibbs. There's a great story. John Madden was visiting with Gibbs. I think it was like 88 or something, maybe 90. And Gibbs said, "Yeah, I like the way this team is going. I like the direction. They're behaving, and we don't have the problems with." And he referenced that shack, and then Madden doesn't have the heart to tell him, because he had been with the players drinking beer in the shack before he sits with Gibbs. And I said, "Did you tell him?" He said, I didn't have the heart to tell him. So there was this kind of blissful ignorance about things, but Gibbs, brilliant man. And he looked at the book. I saw him at a Super Bowl after the book came out, and he says, "Yeah, thank you for that. I liked it." And he looks at the cover and he sees Walsh and Parcells on there. He says, I'm looking at this picture. I'm like, these guys, if it weren't for these guys, I'd have more Super Bowls. And he meant it, not in an egotistical way, but he truly realized that those were the guys standing in his way, because they just kept trading shots at winning Super Bowls. And they did it in such different ways. Gibbs probably the most normal of those three. He just was not like Parcells is insane in his own way. And Walsh was deeply insecure. I mean, the thing I learned about him was, oh my God, he is just off the wall. And that created a shortened coaching tenure. It really did for all of them. Coaching burnout was a factor for all of them.
But it is funny you say about Gibbs, because having been around him for a few years, he would joke about things, but you could see some of the jokes about, well, I'm just a gym teacher, or English, like, oh, he was a gym teacher. And, he would always reference that, or like, these guys are all smart, I have to work harder. He always believed he had to outwork everybody versus outsmarting them. But the outworking led to a lot of times outsmarting people.
Absolutely. And he does regret it, even to this day, the time that he missed with his family, which is why he loved racing so much, because they could do it as a family. And then, of course, he lost his oldest son, and that was tragic, a couple of years ago. But yeah, he wrestled with that a lot, and it really affected him down to his soul. But he came out of it. He's a great man and a great leader, very humble guy. And he had one thing where they had a reunion of one of the Super Bowl teams, and he went to it, and he was thinking about before. He said, "I wonder if these guys are going to kind of realize how special I considered it." They probably, they've gone on, they got families, and like they move on in life. And then they get together, and he realizes they all have their sharing with him. And he realizes just how important that time was. And all those coaches felt the same way when they went back and kind of realized. And, Parcells called it a blood kinship you develop when you are a champion. And it's true, it lasts forever.
Bob, great stuff. You can follow Bob on Twitter at Bob Glauber, Glauber, and read him on Newsday.com. Love the insight. Thanks for coming on, Bob.
John, my pleasure. Always good talking to you. And you do a great job too, my man. I know you grind. Readers are lucky to have you, John. Believe me.
After this break, I'll be back with Tyler Roman to discuss some good fantasy football plays for not only this week, but coming weeks, starting with the Ravens running back situation. Plus, is Logan Thomas a good fantasy play?
Support for this podcast comes from Drizzly. Hey, you. Yes, you with the empty drink in your hand. Have you ever heard of Drizzly, the #1 app for alcohol delivery? With Drizzly, you can compare prices from your local liquor stores to get the best deals on a huge selection of beer, wine, and spirits. Then have them delivered right to your door in under 60 minutes. And right now, Drizzly is giving all new customers $5 off their first order. Just enter promo code SAVE at checkout. Just download the Drizzly app or go to drizzly.com. That's DRIZLY.com and use promo code SAVE for $5 off your first order.
You've heard me talking about Lono Coffee for a couple months now. Let me tell you a little bit about who they are and what they're about. Lone Oak Coffee is based in the Shenandoah Valley, just a nice bunch of people who are open for business during this trying time. Just look at their website, loneoakcoffee.com, and what do they highlight? Their core values of quality, family, transparency. They work with co-op farmers from all over the world to source their beans. They also support small farmers to find the right beans. During this pandemic, one of my saving graces has been grinding my beans from Lone Oak Coffee and taking a few minutes before the day to savor the coffee, get my mind right. Put a little jazz or Frank Sinatra or Louis Armstrong on in the background, it's even better. I've enjoyed all their blends, but among my favorites, the Ethiopian Guji, love the berry flavor, the Mexican Chiapas, and their house blend. Start your day off right with Lone Oak Coffee. Visit loneoakcoffee.com, that's LONEOAK coffee.com. Use promo code COFFEE2020 for a discount. You can thank me later. Welcome back. Now here's my conversation with former NFL scout Tyler Roman. Now we're back talking some fantasy football, and you always have the sleepers or some interesting plays. And I think as we get to this point in the season, I think it's like because the injury factor starts to pile up, there's a lot of interesting guys or situations out there. What are some of the ones that you're looking at right now?
Some guys that I'm looking at, look at the Ravens situation. Mark Ingram's going to be out, looks like again this week. Last week, J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards stepped in. Dobbins had 15 carries for over 100 yards. Edwards had 16 carries for over 80 yards and a touchdown. So those are two guys that I would look at to replace that. I mean, I think they both could be good flex options. They're both going to get the ball a lot. The Ravens love to run the ball. That's their key to success. So both those guys are guys to keep an eye on. Another guy I like who had his best game of the season as a rookie is Zach Moss. He's actually Santana's cousin. He's a third rounder out of Utah. He's getting goal line carries there. He actually outsnapped Devin Singletary last week for the first time. And he had 14 carries, 81 yards, and 2 TDs. Another guy I like in the flex position. He's playing Seattle, who has a pretty bad defense for the most part. So that's another guy to look at. One more guy injury-wise. The Cardinals, Kenyon Drake has an ankle injury. He's going to be out for a couple weeks. So Chase Edmonds is a guy you guys have to get. I would have got him last week because he was on a bye, but still, he can give you RB1 production. He's going to get 20 touches a game because they love to throw it to him out of the backfield, give him carries. And one last guy, the Colts running back situation is a little odd. I thought Jonathan Taylor was going to be the guy, but last week they kind of went with the hot hand, and Jordan Wilkins was the guy to consider. He had 89 yards on 20 carries, and maybe they're going to ride the hot hand. So maybe just pick him up and see. Maybe don't start Jordan Wilkins this week, but that's a guy to keep your eye on going forward if they're going to do a little more committee sharing in that backfield. What
about a guy like Damian Harris coming off a pretty solid game for the Patriots? Jets coming up this week. What do you do with there?
Yeah, I do like him. The Patriots backfield for years now, Belichick does what he wants. Obviously, they want to win the game. You can never really get the right running back. Damian Harris, I think, is definitely their guy to pound the rock. I think he's going to get the most carries. He is a good matchup, obviously, with the Jets this week, considering how bad they are. So I would, another guy in the RB3 flex section, coming off a 100-yard game, talented guy out of Alabama. So yeah, that definitely is another guy to keep an eye on.
And then going to the injury situation, the Kenny Galladay situation in Detroit with Marvin Jones now, does he become a bigger factor? I mean, he had a pretty good game the other day. They are facing, Minnesota this week, I believe. And so their past events are great. So is that a guy, how do you assess that situation? Because again, when you have a guy out, then more attention is going to be focused on him too, but he will get targets.
Exactly. Yeah. Marvin's going to be, I guess, the de facto number one there. He didn't have as much success earlier in the year when Kenny Galladay missed those first 2 games. He didn't get the ball as much as I thought he would be being the number one option. So that's something to think about going forward. Because I think he had a touchdown those first 2 weeks, but maybe 6 or 7 catches total. So obviously defenses are going to keen on him. I wouldn't rely on him for production right away because, like you said, they're going to key on him. And plus, they have T.J. Hockenson, who Stafford threw to him 10 times last week. He had 10 targets, a season high. So look for him to look in that direction. And I think I know he likes Marvin Hall, too, the other receiver who's a good deep threat. But, I mean, if you guys had Kenny Galladay, I think Marvin Jones is a good option. One other guy you guys could think about would be Corey Davis from the Titans, coming off a great 128-yard game. His best game of the season. Also another guy that take with a grain of salt because he has these games and then he goes quiet for a couple games. Obviously, A.J. Brown is at number one in that offense. but Corey Davis will get some looks there because they do. With Derrick Henry, they're going to set up the pass, and Tannehill's going to have some open looks just because the play action is going to work so well with Henry in the backfield.
What about last guy I'll ask you about is McCall Hardman. What do you do with him? Because if Sammy Watkins, and I don't know his status at this point, but if he doesn't play, is that an interesting guy, or do you just say with that offense you kind of have to be careful in terms of because there's so many other guys?
Exactly. I mean, he's probably worth a place in your roster. Again, I try to see it a couple of weeks before I would give him starting reps because I know McCall had that. I think he had 30-yard touchdown basically on that jet sweep action last week. So like you said, they're going to spread the ball around. Obviously, Kelsey and Tyreek are going to be the number 1 and 2 options going forward. And they didn't run as much last week, but I expect eventually to them to start feeding Clyde and Le'Veon as the season goes on. But again, he's probably worth a roster stash, but I probably wouldn't start McCall at least for a couple of weeks to see some more production. So
let's turn to Washington versus the Giants, and this is a matchup that we saw it a couple weeks ago.
Yep.
We've seen what's happened in the interim. What, from a fantasy perspective, what are you looking at for this game?
Well, I mean, the Giants had a really nice performance unexpectedly last night against Tampa, but I think I really probably would stay away from anyone starting wise in their offense right now. Evan Ingram probably be the only one I'd be comfortable with, but that's more an indictment on the tight end situation this year. No one's been really great in fantasy. So Evan Ingram, if you got him, is worth a start. He actually got probably one of his better games of the year last night against Tampa. And as far as Washington, Terry, I think, is a must start. He had 74 yards against them a couple weeks ago. And, it's evident he's obviously the number 1 option in this offense. So I think, he's going to get his touches. And Antonio Gibson's obviously coming off the best game of his career. I think they're going to try to keep feeding him the ball. So he's another good option in that flex position. And going back to the tight end situation around the league, I think Logan Thomas is worth a start at this point, coming off back-to-back double-digit performances. I think he's far and away the number 2 option in this offense in the passing game. So I think Logan is a solid option if you guys got a George Kittle was hurt or another tight end on bye. I think he's worthy of a start.
And the last thing I want to ask you, going back to Logan Thomas, just from a scouting perspective, what have you seen in him in terms of his growth throughout the season? Is it just getting opportunities, or do you see something about his game that has maybe developed at that position?
I mean, it's obviously gotten better. I think in the offseason, I didn't think too much of the signing because obviously he hasn't had too much production. He still is relatively new to the position, obviously playing quarterback throughout college and, tight end all over a couple of years. So obviously, I think, like you said, getting more targets has helped him. I still like to see him make that difficult catch. He's had a couple opportunities where Kyle has given him a chance and Logan hasn't come away with the play for him to take that next step as a tight end. So hopefully I want to see him in that perspective. I've been pretty impressed with his blocking, which again, something I didn't think was going to be a strong aspect of his game, considering he was a former quarterback, but I think obviously that has helped. And, he's still not the greatest route runner, but he's a big body, give him a shot. So yeah, I mean, he's definitely a really good tight end for this offense right now. I still think maybe his ceiling is a really good number 2 tight end.
Right.
But with the options on this offense, obviously he's a starting player for this team right now. So,
and it is funny that you bring up the blocking because that's one of the things because I even asked him that a couple of weeks ago when we had him on Zoom and like, where are you better? And he felt it was the blocking more than anything else. And you can see that sometimes you just learn how to take the right angles and the right steps to get to be effective on a block. I think that's where some of the areas where he has been better. I think, so we'll see where it goes from here. Tyler, always appreciate your time. Thanks for the insight.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for this week. Thanks to Bob Glauber and Tyler Roman for coming on, and thank you for listening. Please remember to support our sponsor, Lono Coffee. Makes for an excellent holiday treat for someone on your list. Tell them Johnny sent you. Talk to you next time.